Hi everyone, how are you doing? I am Chris, and this is the mini PC that maybe a lot of you have been looking for in terms of port selection and being AMD powered. So this one has the Ryzen 5, the 3550H in here. Maximum turbo is 3.7 gigahertz, 4 cores, 8 threads in total. Now this model does come with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of NVMe storage, plus a 2.5-inch 1 terabyte hard drive. This is the maximum spec that you can buy configured that Beelink has sent out to me in exchange for this review. By the way, Beelink is not approving of this video before I publish it. No money's changing hands or anything like that. So why is it interesting? Well, lots of ports on it. It's got dual gigabit LAN ports on the rear. It has 3 display outs on the rear, so 2 HDMI 2s, Displayport, and even at the front it's got Type-C with, yes you guessed it, video out as well. So that's got 4K 60. All of display out 4K 60. It's got 2 fans in here to keep it cool. It even has a fingerprint reader on the top and an M.2 slot, an additional one inside here that I will show you if you wanted to install, say, a SATA 3 M.2 SSD. Now run through here the box contents. So we've got our power supply. Start with this first. This is 57 watts. It does have a status LED, and this is a European plug here for me. So you can see on the back there, it's the 19 volts, 3 amps, and it's a pretty much standard connector to this one that it uses. So we do have a user manual here that is in various different languages. So just running through all your basics there, pretty straightforward. And there's just another thing here too on the installation of components too. That one is all in Chinese, but most people probably won't even be going into the internals with this, and it's pretty straightforward too anyway. So they have included 2 HDMI cables here, so a long HDMI one and then a shorter one if you happen to be using this, for example, on a VESA mount. You don't want the long cable, you just want the short one to get to your TV's or monitor's input. They've even included, this is the first too, I don't normally ever see this, we've got Windows 10 here on a pen drive for us. And it even tells us how to get into the boot menu. F7 is written on there, which is great. Here is the VESA mount, and there are some screws as well for us. So let's have a look at the build-in design now of the GTR. So this happens to be the best mini PC I have looked at in terms of port selection. So there is our fingerprint reader working with Windows Hello. You see they've got the radon stickers on here. Now I prefer not to have the stickers, and especially they've actually put one of them around the wrong way. But hey, that's just a minor little thing. Now if you're wondering about the dimensions of this particular model here too, well, you can see it's about 12 millimeters. I showed it on the back of it anyway, by 17, and the height of it is very small. It's only 4. So very, very good, the size of it. It's a little bit maybe larger than others, but when you see in terms of what we have port selection, port-wise here, really, really good. So we've got dual microphones on the front here. Now, a lot of people say, well, you don't need microphones on a mini PC, but maybe you're using Windows Cortana. I don't really use it much, but if you need it, you've got that option there. We've got a jack in here as well for audio and microphone support. Now this Type-C does support video out on the front here, which is really good. 2 USB 3 ports. We've got a clear the CMOS there, so if you mess up settings in the BIOS, you can simply use that to reset it. And then our power button here, which has a rubber finish to it. Both of those power buttons actually, both of those buttons should I say, very good. Now there's a little flap right here on the bottom, and that's to help us to remove the back of the lid here. You can see on the back right here, it says GTR, and it even gives us the settings there to get into the BIOS and the boot order, which we don't often see. See at the top right there, nice big solid feet, 4 screws holding the rear lid on. I will take a look at the internals shortly. And either side we've got this right here, which says GRS, but not GTR, intake vents. So it does say not to cover them, which is good. And then on the back, impressive port selection, and you can see the dual exhaust vents here. So there's actually 2 fans inside this. So there's our power in, 2 gigabit LANs right there, which is great to see. A lot of people do ask for this in many PCs, the ones I have been reviewing. And look at this, HDMI, 2 HDMIs, Displayport. So the HDMI 2 spec, Displayport 1.4, so they can all run, you can run 3 monitors at 4K 60 Hertz with this, and then an additional 4 USB 3 ports here. So great in terms of ports and coverage there. One of the best, in fact, the best I've seen on a mini PC. Now the VESA mount bracket, there are two holes here. That is where you mount it. If you were going to put this onto a TV on the back of it or a monitor. So I've removed the 4 screws here. Lift off the rear lid. There's a little rubber tab here that you need to pull up on first. And that gives us access to our internals here. So 2.5 inch, they're using a Western Digital Blue drive here. So it's not super quick, but this is great for, of course, installing huge amounts of larger files and not affecting, you don't want to fill up that SSD. So once you undo the 4 screws, which I've already done for the purposes of this video, one there, one there, one there, and one here. It is actually clearly labeled. The build and the layout of this mini PC, I must comment on, is fantastic. It is really good. So this just lifts up, okay, revealing our internals. So we have 2 M.2 drives. So the one that, of course, is in use is NVMe. The one next to it is SATA 3. So this is great. You can add then another 2 terabyte drive or something in there. RAM upgradable if you wanted to do this. So it is dual channel, of course, this particular mini PC. And I can see looking at the RAM chips that there's the Micron logo. So they're using Micron RAM chips in that one, but I can't see any brand on it. Now, just to point out that the back of this plate here, this is actually a huge heatsink for our SSDs with a very nice thick thermal pad that is right here. So that's just an extra they've done, which is really good to see. And again, the build quality is very, very good here, and the layout of everything and these components. I really like what they've done. So I'm going to get it all assembled back together again, get all my files set up. We'll run through some benchmarks, some gaming performance, thermals, and fan noise, and we'll take a look at everything to do with the GTR. So first up, in the BIOS here, I wanted to show you this. Now, I knew it was going to be completely unlocked to us, because why else would they give us that BIOS reset button on the front of the mini PC next to the power button? That's because we've got every single option you can think of completely open to us with this. So that means the chipset settings, they are there. In fact, when I say every single option, graphics configuration shows nothing. We've got 2 gigabytes dedicated of RAM to the Vega 8, but we cannot adjust it in the BIOS settings. As far as I can tell, I can't see those settings for it. So under advanced, there are some handy settings in this, okay? So one of them is under the AMD CBS, okay? This under DF common options, in fact, no, it's UMC common options, is DDR4. So this is our RAM timings and the RAM speeds. Now, this is normally all set on automatic. There's a little warning here, so make sure you accept that. So it would be looking like this, auto, okay? But we want to run our 2.6 gigahertz RAM at the 2.6 gigahertz. By default, out of the box here, the BIOS will run it at 2.4 for some reason, because it's only detecting and using the auto settings. So enable it, find a memory clock speed here, which would be on auto, and go along and set 1.3 gigahertz, okay? So this is half of the RAM speeds. So this is DDR4, 2666. We will be running now with this, so the maximum speed. So I recommend doing that, and then you just save and exit. Now, to point out as well, there is an option in here, I saw it before, that is our power option. So if it was to lose power, it can detect the power state as back on and have it automatically power up and boot up. So this is great for those of you out there that want to run a server, a file server or whatever. We've got this option to have it automatically come back on. So that is something we don't always see on many PCs, but most of them are now including it. So save changes, exit, let's jump into Windows setup. So when you first power it up, Windows, of course, has not been set up. You have to go through the setup, and these are the pre-installed languages we get. So there are quite a few language packs already on board here, which is good. That means you don't have to download them and install them and go through that process. So this mini PC, it comes with Windows 10 Pro installed. It's the version 1909. And I will show you how they've got the disks partitioned. So that 1 terabyte spindle drive, if you get this particular version here, they've partitioned it in half. Okay, and they've given us the drivers as well on one of those partitions, which is really handy to have. A lot of manufacturers aren't doing this anymore. They used to. They force you to go onto their website and download them, but they're all there, including our Windows 10 image as well. That's there, so that is great. That's very handy to have. So with that NVMe drive, we get 443 gigabytes free, approximately, and these are the speeds of the drive. So looking at it, I cannot actually see any brand anywhere. The device manager doesn't list either what it is. It just says SSD 512 gigabytes. So I don't know what brand it is. Those speeds are reasonable. they're not the fastest for NVMe, but it's still so much quicker than, of course, running a SATA 3 drive, which you could install in the other M.2 slot if you wanted to do that. You've got that possibility there. So in the device manager here, this is the fingerprint reader. Okay, you can see what brand that's from, and it works fine. Of course, if you've got it set up with the VESA mount, it's not practical, so you wouldn't be using it. It's only when the mini PC is close to you, you can actually touch it with your finger, unlock, and go straight into Windows. So here is the wireless card. So this is non-upgradable. It's part of the motherboard, and it's a very quick, very, very quick wireless card, this one here. I'm able to get transfer rates of around 1.2 to 1.5 gigabits per second. So that is faster than the LAN ports. The two LAN ports, if you're wondering, who are they? What's the brand? Realtek's the brand, okay? Both of them are Realtek there. So nothing else really of interest. So the processor does show up, the Ryzen 5 3550H. 8 times, of course, because of the 8 threads and it's 4 cores. Maximum turbo is 3.7 gigahertz. I do happen to have CPU-Z open here for a little bit more information. So it is running the max TDP of 35 watts, which is the max you can configure. Understandable, it's got the dual cooler in here, so it can run up those higher clocks across all 4 of those cores, which is great. And the fan noise, I'll get onto that later on, but it's a little bit annoying at times because of this 35 watts here we're having to deal with. Now, the graphics here, so the Vega 8 with its 8 cores does have 2 gigabytes dedicated to it. With the 16 gigabytes of RAM we have, that makes sense. So I think most people will be very happy that they've done that. I am here. And of course the memory speeds, well, this is as fast as what our RAM speeds are, depending on what you set with your RAM or what RAM you're going to be using. So with the default RAM, it would be right here now, the 2.666 megahertz that I've clocked it to, but it was actually 2.4 gigahertz out of the box. As I showed you when we looked at the BIOS there, you can quickly change that and make sure you get the maximum RAM speeds there. And it will clock up to a maximum of 1200 megahertz to there as well. Very quickly to show you, here is the CPU-Z benchmark. You can see the results there. It's not actually too bad considering that this is, well, it's last gen now, but it's still a very good chip, especially the Vega 8 graphics it has on board. So before I get onto some benchmarks, I wanted to point out a couple of things. That the 4K on the Type-C out, so that's the front port, does support 4K 60. All of the video out ports do, which is great. All of the USB 3 ports also, they support external hard drives. No problems there, which is good. The latency, so for real-time audio, it's looking very good. It tells us here that it is suitable for handling those kind of tasks. It stays in the green. Not like with some of the Intel mini PCs I have reviewed, this could be in the yellow there and just not so great. The latency being pretty poor, but not with AMD. Normally AMD is actually pretty good with that. So, Cinebench R15 score here. This one isn't bad. So 704 CB for this type of chip, what it is, the quad core. Now, if we compare that to the AMD Ryzen 5, the 3400G I just looked at was the last AMD review. Much more potent. That's a 65 watt desktop APU. That got a score of 760 CB. So this one actually isn't too far off. So not bad at all. Cinebench R20, very similar score to the last Ryzen 5, the 3550H that I looked at. Very, very similar there. So that's good there too as well. And then moving over to some Geekbench scores here, which yes, do tend to favor Intel. Intel does wonderful with Geekbench. Here's an OpenCL score there. So 10,000 points. And that Ryzen 5 with the Vega 11 graphics, 3400G, that got 16,000 OpenCL score for this one. So this is 10,000, a little bit slower as expected because it's only the 8 GPU cores, not the 11. Here is Geekbench 5. So this is an okay score. I mean, it's nothing amazing, but it's still pretty decent for how small this is. And Geekbench 4 there as well. So those are some synthetic benchmarks. General performance for video playback and things like that, very good. I won't show you spreadsheets or docs because it's blazing fast. It just handles everything. No problems, but my demo clips here that I like to run. So I'll start off with the most demanding 140 megabits per second, 4K 10-bit HEVC. And that's just real smooth and no problems. By the way, I wanted to point out that all of the benchmarks I did run, of course, with nothing running in the background. Right here, you can see I've got Steam open and Photoshop. That's just to speed things up here for my review. But I always run the benchmarks with nothing else running. I check the device manager. There's nothing running in the background with Windows either. So Swordsmith, 4K 60. Very, very good. Now, checking with Windows, I had a look. And it doesn't seem to support HDR at all because it's reporting to me under the 4K. And if you want to enable HDR, that's just not giving me that option. So it looks like, at least with these drivers, that you're still not getting the HDR with this one, unfortunately, with these mobile chips. Editing 4K video in Adobe Premiere Pro here, and I'll show you the export time soon as well for 4K. But the playback of the timeline is actually quite fluid. Now, even running this at full, I'll hit play, and it is great. This is probably one of the more smoothest I have seen it run too. Now, going back to other areas in the timeline, on full, it still keeps up, and that is great. So the performance there is very, very good. Now, the CPU does max out to about 100% now and then when doing this. That is kind of normal. Now, I will actually just bring up the task manager here. Just have a look at the performance. So keep that there. And the fan's kicking in now and then to 100% RPM, and a little bit of noise is coming through. So export times now, take a look at that. So we're going to export this to the YouTube preset, and that's 4K. And 1 minute of footage more or less. See how long it takes compared to other systems. I have actually noticed that this one is a little bit slower here. So I'm going to hit start and then export. Okay, so it's about to finish up. So when that bar disappears, there we go. So that was about 1 minute and you could say 2 seconds, which is a little bit slow compared to the last one I looked at with the same spec. Did it in 44 seconds. So I'm not too sure why there's difference here. I think it could possibly be RAM timings, the RAM, but it shouldn't actually have that kind of an impact here. So not sure. On to our gaming performance now. So this is GTA 5 720p on just the normal settings here. And it runs well, okay, but not quite as good as I was expecting. And I found out why that 4K video export time as well wasn't as expected. Take a look at the GPU clocks. So it should be 1200 megahertz is the maximum for the Vega 8, and it doesn't seem to want to run that 1200. Occasionally I see it get up to 1100 megahertz. But you can see it seems to be throttling down the GPU clock for some reason. And I did actually go into the BIOS. I reset all of the settings. So that's the RAM at the original clock, and it will still do this. So I'm not too sure what's up with that. I think Beelink just need a simple BIOS update for us to correct that, because the thermals are excellent, very, very good. Fans on, yes, it's a little bit loud. I'll give you a sample of that shortly. We'll talk a little bit more about the thermals, but the thermals are very, very good. So it's not thermal throttling causing this. It's just something else, I believe. Counter-Strike here. This is 1080p on the lowest settings, and we have a very good frame rate, around 100 frames per second here, very smooth. I can't see the GPU clocks here because I have to disable that overlay, but I do have just the FPS counter here that comes with Steam. And a last quick test of the one game that has gained an older title. This is Skyrim 720p, and you're getting around 50 frames per second here. Note that the GPU clock, still that problem with it, not getting up to 1200 megahertz here. So we do need a BIOS update, I believe, from Beelink to correct this. So what happens if I just start to irritate some of the guards here? See if it's going to really drop that frame rate. So it dips down to about 30. Still very playable though, which is good to see. On this hardware, from an APU, integrated graphics, this is not bad performance at all. Onto our thermals and fan noise. So when it's not doing anything demanding, the fan is very, very good. It will ramp up. You definitely hear it once it gets going. You're doing something demanding like gaming or Cinebench benchmarks, things like that. We'll get it up to 100% and you definitely hear it. But the thermals are very, very good. The whole time I have used this mini PC, it has remained under 70 degrees on the APU. To touch it, we're looking at temperatures of about 35 degrees maximum. This is extremely cool for a mini PC. And this is after running it for hours on end. So the cooling definitely doing its job, but the trade-off is you do have that fan noise. And I'll just give you a very quick sample now. The fan, it's at 100%. You can definitely hear it. It's not super loud. It's not as loud as a gaming laptop, but it still is a little. So it isn't the quietest mini PC out there. Now, the other thing too, power use, very good at idle. It's about 8 to 10 watts at idle, and peak use I've seen 66 watts, and that was with gaming. Now, when you're gaming, it's normally about 50 to 55. Now, Linux does run fine on this, but you need to find a distro that does have the drivers for the Intel Wi-Fi AX200. That is the only thing. That's the only hurdle that you might have, depending on what Linux distro you are using. Otherwise, it's really smooth and fluid. All right, so price-wise, this as a bare bones mini PC will be selling, I've seen online, for about 380 euros. But you do need to supply RAM and SSD operating system. Wireless card is in here. Now, my spec with the 16 gigabytes, the 512 gigabyte NVMe SSD, and 1 terabyte spindle hard drive does sell for 600 euros. So yes, that is a little pricey. You can build a desktop PC with probably actually more power than this, but it won't be this compact. So this is something that you can, with the VESA mount out of the way behind a monitor or a TV, and it's just unseen. That's great. That's one of the things with these mini PCs. Or just simply place it in a bag and take it with you somewhere and connect it up to a TV. Yeah, I know, guys, in the comments that why don't you just buy a laptop? Well, it all depends what you want. But this has the 3 displays out here and then the Type-C on the front. So that is great, having the 4 options for display out. And then the dual LAN ports as well. Is a laptop going to have the dual LAN ports? Definitely not. I don't think I've seen any laptops, or at least not any normal kind of gaming laptops, that would have that. So the thermals on this thing are the best I have seen, I think, for a mini PC. Definitely the surface temperatures. So internal temps, it doesn't go over 70 degrees Celsius. The APU in here, which is great. And then, okay, it gets up to about 35 degrees. Just around this area, a little bit warm here and a little bit warm around that area, but that is actually one of the better temperatures I have seen. So very good thermals at the cost of, yes, a little bit of fan noise when pushed hard. So when it's idle, you're not doing anything demanding, it is quiet. And sometimes if you do something demanding, okay, the fans will ramp up, later on they do disappear. So the fan profiles seem to be good, but I think a little bit of tweaking may be in line for, say, more demanding use, where it does get a little bit loud. And they could maybe tone down the RPMs just a little there. So that's one of the cons, it gets a little loud. The other thing is, okay, it does have something going on with that GPU clock. The Vega 8 should be running under peak performance, under demanding games at 1200 megahertz, but it's only about 1100. It's sometimes even 200 less megahertz than it should be. Now, I'm in discussions with Beelink. I do believe there's a fix coming for that. A BIOS update should be able to correct that, and that will then give us the performance that you could expect, because the Firestrike score in the gaming just was a little bit lower there than expected, but it is overall quite good. So port selections on this thing is great. Expandability with the extra M.2 slot there inside. Build quality of this housing, the way they've got everything labeled, the packaging, it's all premium. It is really good. It is impressive how they've got this all packaged up in such a well-designed body too. Very, very good here. So I really do like this mini PC, and I think once we get that fix there for the GPU, and hopefully maybe a little bit of a tweak to the fans, this thing is gonna be great. So in the future, I do plan to, of course, check out some of the Ryzen 4000 series APUs, mini PCs. They will be up and coming in the channel. Hopefully maybe next month, I'll be looking at one. And I do have more mini PC reviews planned. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I do hope to see you back in the next one. Bye for now.